Great, appreciate it. Mr. Schiff, ready?
And feel free to stop me whenever you want, because I can never talk for 5 minutes. Anyway, a lot of people always ask me, why am I running for the Senate? I mean, why do I want the aggravation? Why do I want the pay cut? And, the reality is I have been a staunch critic of Washington for years. Throughout my profession, I've been criticizing the policies coming out of Washington, coming out of Congress, the Federal Reserve. I've been doing what I can to help my clients at my brokerage firm invest their money to protect themselves from the devastation that I saw coming as a result of these policies. But at this point, I think the stakes are now too high. I find it hard to remain a spectator and just watch this train wreck happen in slow motion. I really feel like I have to go to Washington and do something about it, try to stop it. I mean, the government is growing like a cancer at this point, and it's sucking the lifeblood out of the economy. If you want to know why the jobs are disappearing, it's because of the government. If you want to know why the economy is so weak, it's because the government is so big. The bigger the government gets, the more resources it drains from the private sector. Barack Obama just proposed a budget of $3.8 trillion for this fiscal year. That's more than twice what the government spent 10 years ago. Twice. Now, I remember 10 years ago, I thought the government was big then. And now it's doubled in size. Most Americans earn less than they did 10 years ago. The stock market is lower than it was 10 years ago. How can the government be twice the size? It has to shrink. We just talked a little bit about what government federal workers are earning. I was shocked to see these numbers. But the average federal worker now earns 60% more than the average private sector worker. And that's in cash. If you count the benefits, the average government employee earns twice what the average person earns in the private sector. How can that be? I mean, they're supposed to be civil servants. They're supposed to work for us. Right? Was it the Twilight Zone? There was a time when the government workers actually earned less. Right? They really were servants. Who's a servant now? So we need to cut this. We need to actually slash federal payrolls. We need to give a pay cut to everybody in Washington because we as taxpayers can't afford these lavish pay packages. The salaries and the benefits need to be cut. And we need to really shrink government. We can't just talk about stopping the growth in the future. We need to make it smaller right now. So not only does that mean cutting the salaries of workers, but eliminating workers entirely. We need to abolish entire government departments. There are a lot of them that we don't need. We can get rid of them. I mean, just one example is the Department of Energy, which we didn't have until Jimmy Carter. So if you thought Jimmy Carter was a great president, then maybe you like the Department of Energy. But when they started that department, the reason they started it was they were going to end our dependence on foreign oil. That was the goal. That's why we have it. Well, when we started it, we imported about 50% of our oil. Now we import 70% of our oil. It's been a colossal failure. They spend $30 billion a year. Abolish it, right? Get rid of it. There are a lot of other departments we don't need. We can consolidate. And we got to go after entitlements. We have to shrink them. We have to cut them. They're bankrupting the nation. We can't avoid it because it's bad politics. Bernie Madoff is in jail for a reason. He's in jail because Ponzi schemes don't work. They don't work when the private sector tries them, and they don't work when the government tries them. We have a coming disaster in Social Security if we don't do something and do something about it soon. The real economic crisis is not in the past. It's in our future. And I've got a very good track record when it comes to predicting economic crises. Of all the people in this country, nobody sounded the alarm louder than I did on the financial crisis of 2008. I mean, for years, I was on television from 2005 through 2008 warning of an economic crisis. I was warning about the reckless monetary policies of the Federal Reserve. I was warning about Freddie and Fannie. I was predicting their bankruptcy. I was warning about the distortions and the moral hazards that government policy was creating. I was warning that when the housing bubble burst, it was going to bankrupt the financial system, that a lot of the banks who had structured and packaged these mortgages were going to fail. But more importantly, I knew that the root cause of the problem was not in the private sector. It was not in Wall Street greed, but in government incompetence, in central bank incompetence. When George Bush gave his famous speech late in his presidency, and he said that Wall Street got drunk, I was out there saying, sure, they were drunk on government alcohol. The Federal Reserve liquored them up. That's why they acted the way they did. That's why Main Street acted the way it did. And so I understood these problems. I understood the NASDAQ bubble. You know, when I first started my brokerage firm, and I started my firm, you know, I worked for a major brokerage house when I first got started. In fact, the first brokerage firm that hired me actually went out of business a week before I started. That was Drexel Burnham. So I never actually started there. And then the next firm that I worked for just went bankrupt a year ago. But it was a major wirehouse firm. But I worked there long enough to realize that I didn't like it. I didn't think that the average investor was getting his fair shake. So I started my own brokerage firm, and I started working out of my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles. And one of the first things I did as an independent broker was warn my clients and my prospective clients of the NASDAQ bubble. I urged people to sell their tech stocks, to sell their NASDAQ stocks, that there was going to be a collapse. And that's how I built my business, because I got a lot of goodwill among a lot of people, and that started me off. And 10 years ago, even as late as 2000, I had one employee in 2000. Now I have better than 100. I have 15,000 customers. I have 6 offices. I have a couple of $1 billion in customer accounts. I run a mutual fund. I run an asset management company. I do investment banking. I didn't do any of that 10 years ago. I was just one guy. And so I understand how businesses grow, and more importantly, understand why they don't grow. The one thing I know for sure is I never could have started my business today the way I did, because the regulation has grown like crazy. I now have 7 people that work for me, and all they do is comply with government regulations. They don't do anything else. It's a complete waste of money. And not only is it making me less productive, it's making all my other workers less productive. If I didn't have these 7 guys, I could have another 100 employees that actually were producing and helping the business. And there are now so many regulations and so many barriers. My lawyer, I pay in legal fees every year more than I earned 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, just in legal bills to stay in business, not because I have problems with my customers. I don't have any, because I have problems with regulators. And why is all this regulation here? I mean, did it stop Bernie Madoff? No. It's not doing any of that. It's gumming up the works. It's so these bureaucrats can justify their big salaries. Why don't we just get rid of them? We need to shrink the government. We keep talking about stimulus. How can we stimulate the economy? The only way to stimulate the economy is to shrink government. The stimulus is the problem. The stimulus is toxic. It's actually a sedative. The more the government stimulates the economy, the weaker it gets. The more bills they pass to create jobs, the more jobs they're going to destroy. Right? Jobs don't come from government. They don't come from passing legislation. They can come from repealing legislation. Jobs come from the private sector. They come from capital, and they come from profits. That's it. Unfortunately, the government is waging war on capital and profits, and so we're destroying our businesses. Somebody needs to go to Washington and put a stop to that. And I think I have credibility on both sides. I have credibility as an entrepreneur. I understand business. I understand finance. My business is finance. It's economics. I wrote a book in 2006 called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. I laid out exactly what was going to happen in 2008. I went around the country lecturing. Not only was I lecturing investors, I lectured groups of realtors, mortgage bankers about these problems. If you want to look at them, go on YouTube. There's thousands of them. They're all over the place. One of the ones that's been seen by the most people, I think somebody who saw me on these things put together a video called "Peter Schiff Was Right," and over 1.6 million people have now seen that, and it just features me arguing with the pundits on CNBC and Fox News, warning about the crisis, and everybody just laughing at me and dismissing me like I was from another planet. Yet all the predictions I've made have come true. So I think if I can go to Washington, D.C., and try to convince the bureaucrats there to listen to me instead of Ben Bernanke or Timothy Geithner, people who have never gotten anything right in their entire careers. And one thing I know, I've tried as a private citizen to get my voices heard in Washington.